Hey, it's James, and welcome to the latest episode of the Inversiverse, episode 18 Submerged Signals, How the Unseen Shapes the Self. We often assume we're conscious agents, thinking, choosing, and acting with awareness. However, much of what shapes our lives occurs beneath our conscious thought. Chemical reactions, childhood imprints, aesthetic cues, and cultural signals that we never consciously register. In this episode of the Inversiverse, we explore the hidden architecture behind identity, the subconscious systems that define how we feel, believe, and behave. We begin with the body's silent intelligence, how the brain, heart, and nervous system respond to stimuli before we notice. From there, we trace how beauty, branding, and distraction bypass reason, how neurodivergence resists indoctrination, and how time is splintered and sold back to us. We'll examine the death of solitude, the rise of expert obedience, humor as a mask for trauma, and the re-enchantment of algorithms in a world starved of spirit. Each section offers a mirror and a method, not to teach you more, but to help you reconnect to what's already within. But first, I've been busy. I wish to take this opportunity to introduce two books I've recently published. A personal reflection, as the Inversiverse continues to grow, expanding into ever deeper layers of perception, programming, and self-awareness. I want to share the two written works that sit at the core of my journey. These books didn't begin as projects. They began as excavations, a way for me to make sense of what I was feeling, questioning, and remembering. Both are connected to the inverse universe in different ways. One explores the inner collapse I had to face before I could rebuild. The other maps the external systems of illusion I was born into, and how they quietly shaped my reality until I learned to see them. Together, they're not just books. They're mirrors. They've helped me wake up, not just intellectually, but emotionally, physiologically, and spiritually. Versiverse, waking up in a world built to keep you asleep. This book emerged directly from the foundation of the Inversiverse series. It's a synthesis of everything I've explored, from media manipulation and social indoctrination to dark psychology, symbolism, and perception itself. It questions what it means to be awake in a world designed to make you forget. It dives into language, identity, influence, trauma, and the illusion of freedom. And it does so not just through research and philosophy, but through lived experience. Writing it was an act of personal rebellion, but also of reconstruction. It helped me piece together my perception, regain clarity, and name the forces I once only felt in shadows. Available worldwide on Amazon and in audiobook format on Google Play Books. My inner child was broken. This is the most personal thing I've ever written. It's a deep, honest, and at times painful look at the emotional wounds I carried, many of which I didn't realize were still controlling me. It explores how childhood conditioning, emotional suppression, and unspoken trauma shaped my personality, relationships, and inner narrative. And it offered me something I didn't even know I needed, a pathway back to myself. This book is about healing, but not in a packaged, polished clinical sense. It's about remembering the moments I had to bury, reconnecting with a part of me that had long been silent, and learning to listen to what my body and subconscious had been trying to say for years. It's deeply connected to the Inversiverse, because real awakening isn't just about seeing the lies outside of you, it's about facing the illusions within. Available worldwide on Amazon. Section 1. Submerged Signals, the Physiology of Unawareness. There was a time I thought I was making choices. I wasn't. I was reacting. My inner child was broken. We tend to believe we are conscious beings, aware, rational, and in control of our lives. For most people, the majority of their decisions, emotional responses, habits, and beliefs are not formed by logic or reflection. They are programmed responses. They arise from systems inside us that operate beneath our conscious awareness, formed long before we had words to describe them. The subconscious is not just a Freudian metaphor. It is a living, breathing infrastructure of unspoken memories, emotional residue, somatic instincts, and electrochemical loops. The term subconscious comes from the Latin sub and conscia. It is literally beneath awareness, But what lives down there shapes everything above, like an underground river redirecting the landscape above it, silently and consistently. As I wrote in My Inner Child Was Broken, my nervous system was trained to anticipate abandonment before my conscious mind knew what abandonment meant. This kind of somatic memory, the body's stored reaction to unresolved experience, is not something you think about. It becomes part of your default perception of the world. And unless it is consciously unpacked, it becomes the lens through which you experience everything: love, danger, intimacy, risk, and truth. Biological basis. The body reacts before the mind understands. Modern neuroscience shows that our bodies respond to stimuli before the brain decides anything. The reticular activating system filters incoming data from the senses, roughly 11 million bits of information per second, and allows only about 40 to reach conscious awareness. Your mind is not a searchlight, it's a flashlight with a very narrow beam, guided mostly by subconscious criteria shaped by past experiences. Hormones and neurotransmitters act like invisible architects of our moment-to-moment reality. Dopamine teaches the brain what to seek. Cortisol trains us to avoid, especially in environments of chronic stress or emotional chaos. Oxytocin encourages bonding, even to those who harm us. Serotonin, often misunderstood as the happiness chemical, is more about regulation and control, influencing mood, behavior, and the need for order or conformity. In trauma research, particularly the work of Bessel van der Kolk and Stephen Porges, we find that the autonomic nervous system often reacts on its own, with fight, flight, freeze, or fawn responses, without the person ever consciously deciding how to respond. This is survival-level patterning. It's not intellectual, it's deeply embedded in physiology. This is why in My Inner Child Was Broken I described, walking into rooms and shrinking before anyone spoke. Not because I was shy, but because I was scanning for safety and not finding it. Quantum recoherence and signal fidelity. While traditional neuroscience focuses on observable chemical processes, more speculative theories, such as quantum cognition and quantum coherence, suggest that consciousness might involve coherence at subatomic levels. Proponents like Matthew Fisher and Stuart Hameroff explore the idea that the microtubules inside neurons could hold and transmit quantum states. When these states are disrupted by trauma, stress, or emotional dissonance, the brain may lose its coherence, meaning the signal of selfhood becomes fragmented and perception warps. Healing in this view becomes an act of re-establishing resonance between body, brain, and field coherence over chaos. This aligns with something I wrote in the Inversiverse book. Waking up isn't about adding new information. It's about remembering what was always signaling beneath the noise. Yet this frontier is not without its critics. Skeptics of quantum mind theories argue that consciousness cannot possibly rely on delicate quantum states in such a warm, wet environment as the brain. While caution is warranted, even mainstream science now accepts that coherence, whether quantum or biochemical, is essential to clarity, perception, and emotional balance. The pineal gland, sleep, and the inner landscape. The pineal gland, often referred to in spiritual traditions as the third eye, is responsible for producing melatonin, which regulates sleep and circadian rhythms. Beyond its biological role, it is linked to altered states of consciousness, vivid dreams, and even the sensation of timelessness. When melatonin cycles are disrupted through screen exposure, trauma, or artificial light, people report dream suppression, emotional dullness, and temporal disorientation. This may seem trivial, but over time, these subtle perceptual shifts dislodge us from our inner world. In the Inversiverse book, I described how modern culture bombards us with dopamine-heavy inputs, stimulation, urgency, and constant novelty while depriving us of introspective space. The result is a kind of spiritual anesthesia where people can no longer feel their subtle signals. The advantage and the cost. The subconscious makes life manageable. It handles routine, habit, and instinct, sparing the conscious mind from burnout. Without it, you'd have to consciously decide how to walk, breathe, or speak every time you do it. But the cost of this convenience is massive. It also stores unexamined pain, outdated defenses, and inherited patterns. The subconscious doesn't differentiate between useful programming and emotional infection. It just repeats what was stored. When left unexamined, the subconscious becomes a prison of recycled trauma. You may think you're choosing, but you're replaying. In my inner child was broken, I wrote. I didn't need new ideas. I needed to stop reacting to old ghosts. That's what this section is about, not learning more, but hearing more clearly the signals your body and psyche have been sending all along. Self-reflection. What lives beneath your knowing? Take a moment, not to think, but to feel. What signals does your body send you that you've been taught to ignore? When discomfort arises, do you intellectualize it? Distract from it? Perform through it? Have you ever mistaken tension for focus? Numbness for calm? People-pleasing for peace? Reflect on moments when your body spoke before your mind could explain. A missed heartbeat, an unexplained gut drop, a wave of heat during a conversation. These aren't random. They are messages, signals buried in your subconscious, shaped by years of patterning. In My Inner Child Was Broken, I explored how much of my identity was shaped by what I learned not to feel. That same disconnection is mirrored in many of us, not as dysfunction, but as adaptation. The question is no longer, what do I know? It's, what have I been trained not to notice? Write your answers without editing, without explaining. Let the subconscious speak back. Practical activity, signal reconnection, the 3x3 scan. This exercise is about rebuilding sensory trust. Not through effort, but through presence. Step 1. Schedule 3 moments in your day to pause for 1 minute. Morning, afternoon, evening. Set reminders if needed. Step 2. During each pause, ask yourself 3 questions. What am I feeling in my body? Tight jaw, clenched fists, tension calm. What emotion is present beneath the surface? Anxiety, indifference, joy or guilt? What thought just passed through my mind? Without judgment or analysis. Step 3. Jot down your answers briefly. Don't try to make meaning. Let this be a pattern recognition exercise across 3 days. What it reveals. You may notice that your reactions aren't random. They're habitual. You may find your body has been signaling overload, fear, or grief long before you noticed. Or you may realize that you rarely feel anything clearly at all, a signal in itself. This activity isn't about fixing. It's about remembering, returning to a baseline of awareness before the noise took over. Section 2. The aesthetic algorithm, beauty, branding, and the manipulation of meaning. Not everything that feels good is good. And not everything that feels clean is clean. Waking up in a world built to keep you asleep. Before we decide what to believe, we often decide what to trust. And trust in the modern world is not built through logic, it's built through design. Aesthetic influence has become one of the most powerful and invisible tools of subconscious control. From government infographics to startup logos and spiritual influencers to pharmaceutical ads, the world is dressed in aesthetic signals designed to feel true, even when they are not. What looks sharp, smooth, calming, or clean is often accepted without interrogation. We assume it's safe because it's well presented. This is not a surface problem. It's a signal problem. Neuroaesthetics and the psychology of design. The field of neuroaesthetics studies how the brain responds to visual input, colors, symmetry, spatial balance, fonts, and faces. It tells us that design can activate reward circuits long before conscious reasoning takes place. A soft blue background with a round logo? Calming. A geometric grid layout with bold type? Trustworthy. A beige serif font on a white minimalist page? Intellectual. Each of these combinations is not neutral, it is neurochemical. Companies, institutions, and even ideological movements understand this. That's why politics now comes with branding guidelines. That's why hospitals resemble art galleries. That's why even countercultural movements lean heavily into design as an identity. As I wrote in Waking Up in a World Built to Keep You Asleep, we live in a world where perception is not shaped by truth, but by vibe. And the vibe is programmable. This is why branding is so effective, not because of what it says, but how it feels to the subconscious mind. You don't need to trust the product if you trust the packaging. This works not only in commerce but in culture. Symbolism, safety, and control. Aesthetic language is ancient. Flags, symbols, geometry, and ritual clothing have always conveyed power. But in the modern era, these visual codes are used algorithmically, tested, refined, and optimized to trigger trust, desire, or awe in milliseconds. The architecture of banks mimics cathedrals. Tech company logos mimic Zen calligraphy. Clothing brands mimic political movements. Political campaigns mimic wellness branding. Everything becomes symbolic, but in reverse. You are not decoding meaning. Meaning is decoding you. In My Inner Child Was Broken, I described my early relationship with appearance and approval. I learned early on that if I looked good, behaved well, and kept things neat, I was safe. That same conditioning applies here. We equate order with safety, clean design with truth, minimalism with morality. But these are not absolute values. They are emotional cues crafted to override deeper questioning. Aesthetic gaslighting and emotional disorientation. The manipulation of aesthetic trust doesn't just influence what we buy, it influences what we believe. A pharmaceutical ad features a happy sunlit family and soft music. A wellness guru posts a monochrome quote card in a neutral font. A government health campaign is packaged like a luxury skincare brand. All of these bypass resistance. This process, aesthetic gaslighting, convinces us that what looks right must be right. When the aesthetic is clean, we doubt our unease. When the tone is soothing, we ignore the content. The subconscious picks up the signal, and the conscious mind rationalizes it later. I ignored my discomfort because the world around me looked polished. This is how branding becomes a belief. We are not just taught what to trust, we are trained on how trust is supposed to feel. And once that feeling is aesthetically anchored, it becomes increasingly difficult to question. Advantages and vulnerabilities. The power of aesthetic language is not inherently evil. Design can calm, inspire, organize, and uplift. The problem arises when that power is used to obscure, mislead, or silence. The advantage is that aesthetic signals can create an instant emotional connection. But the disadvantage is that they can disarm critical thought. When everything is branded, even resistance, the subconscious learns to trust the surface over substance. And that opens the door for subtle coercion through beauty. Conclusion to Section 2. Aesthetics are not neutral. They are a symbolic seduction. We are not just influenced by beauty, we are programmed by it. But what happens when your mind doesn't accept that programming? What happens when the system doesn't fit the shape of your brain? In the next section, we explore what it means to be neurologically out of sync with a culture that rewards conformity, and how neurodivergence may hold both the glitch and the gift. Section 3. Neurodivergence as resistance when the brain won't fit the system. We are told that the human brain is remarkably adaptive. It can rewire itself, overcome trauma, and learn to function within nearly any structure. But what happens when the structure itself is broken, and the brain simply refuses to comply? Neurodivergence isn't a flaw in design. It is a deviation from a norm that was never natural to begin with. In a culture built around linear thought, rigid routines, standardized expectations, and social performance, the neurodivergent mind doesn't malfunction. It misaligns. It resists automaticity. It rejects facades. It questions rituals that others have been conditioned to perform without pause. And in doing so, it becomes both a vulnerability and a threat to the system it struggles to adapt to. The construction of normal. The concept of normal is not scientific, it is sociopolitical. What counts as normal cognition or behavior has always been shaped by the needs of the dominant culture. During the Industrial Revolution, normal meant punctuality, obedience, and repetition. During the Digital Revolution, it means speed, responsiveness, and engagement. Those who don't comply, who are too sensitive, too slow, too blunt, too scattered, and too intense are pathologized. Diagnoses like ADHDism, dyslexia, and sensory processing disorders describe ways of being that fail to meet institutional expectations, not necessarily indicators of disorder in themselves. Yet we forget that those expectations were never neutral. They were designed to create compliant workers, consistent consumers, and predictable behaviors. The fact that neurodivergent minds struggle to maintain this illusion of coherence does not make them dysfunctional. It reveals how dysfunctional the broader framework has become. A different sensory threshold. Many neurodivergent people operate with heightened sensory input. Sounds that most people ignore may feel intrusive. Visual clutter may become overwhelming. Emotional atmospheres are felt somatically. Time doesn't follow a consistent rhythm. It dilates, collapses, and skips. This altered sensory threshold leads to a kind of rawness and ongoing hyper-awareness that makes superficial interaction exhausting and deception obvious. In environments that reward performance and suppression, this kind of sensitivity is seen as excess. But in a society that thrives on numbing distraction and overconsumption, sensitivity becomes a rebellion. It refuses to be desensitized. This is why many neurodivergent individuals struggle with institutional life. Schools, offices, medical systems, and social norms operate on unspoken scripts that assume uniform perception. But not everyone's nervous system plays by those rules. Executive dysfunction or intuitive prioritization. One of the most misunderstood features of neurodivergence is executive dysfunction, often framed as laziness, irresponsibility, or lack of discipline. But what if it isn't dysfunctional? What if the neurodivergent mind prioritizes based on intuitive meaning rather than imposed structure? Many who are neurodivergent report difficulty in completing tasks that feel meaningless or morally misaligned, yet show profound focus when engaged with something that resonates. This isn't a deficit, it's a refusal to dissociate. In that sense, what's called dysfunction may be a kind of integrity, a cognitive system that refuses to separate task from meaning. The digital landscape and masking fatigue. In digital spaces, neurodivergent traits often become exaggerated for better and worse. The internet provides a refuge from overstimulation, yet also encourages chronic masking, the constant editing of self to match neurotypical norms. Social media, in particular, amplifies performance while reducing space for depth, nuance, and non-linear communication. Masking, the act of concealing natural behaviors to appear socially acceptable, is both exhausting and damaging. Studies show that long-term masking leads to anxiety, depression, and identity fragmentation. For many neurodivergent individuals, the cost of appearing normal is a loss of self, and still they are expected to adapt, not the systems. This expectation creates an invisible trauma, the trauma of continuous self-suppression in exchange for social access. The double edge of pattern sensitivity. Another trait common in neurodivergent perception is pattern sensitivity. This can manifest as pattern recognition, such as high systems thinking, noticing inconsistencies, or hypersensitivity to social dynamics, verbal cues, and environmental shifts. While often dismissed as overthinking or paranoia, this perceptual intensity can also lead to deeper insight, innovation, and truth detection. Neurodivergent individuals often spot emotional dishonesty before others even register that something is off. However, this same trait makes them vulnerable to overstimulation, emotional flooding, and gaslighting. They are more aware of subtle changes, yet often less equipped to buffer them emotionally. Neurology meets philosophy, inversion, integration, and identity. From a neurological standpoint, neurodivergent brains exhibit structural and functional differences in dopamine transport systems, amygdala reactivity, and cortical connectivity. These aren't glitches, they are simply other blueprints. But philosophy raises a more unsettling question. If identity is shaped by perception, and perception is shaped by neurodivergence, then whose reality are we expected to conform to? What does it mean to function well in a system designed to suppress your natural way of being? Perhaps neurodivergence is not just a cognitive variation, but an existential resistance, a refusal to submit to unnatural scripts, linear narratives, or aesthetic obedience. It disrupts the algorithm, it leaks the truth. In a world designed to numb, distort, and homogenize, those who feel more, notice more, and question more are not liabilities. They are living indicators that the system does not fit the soul. Let's undertake an activity, self-reflection. Where are you forcing yourself to fit? Are there aspects of your daily life that feel painfully unnatural, yet you force yourself to comply? Where do you perform to be understood, accepted, or left alone? Do you mask your emotional or sensory truth to pass as functional? What might it mean to design your life around your actual perception, rather than one you've been told is appropriate? Practical activity, the neurointegrity map. This exercise helps you locate where your internal signals conflict with external structures. List 3 behaviors or routines you force yourself to do daily, e.g. meetings, phone calls, small talk, or deadlines. Next to each, write how your body and emotions respond. Are you exhausted, numb, overstimulated, disconnected? Now list 3 behaviors you do spontaneously, joyfully, without reward, e.g. deep focus, drawing, pattern mapping, walking alone, or stimming. Compare the emotional tone of both lists. What would shift if your environment allowed more of the second list? This is not a call to escape all obligation. It's an invitation to stop gaslighting your nervous system. Conclusion to Section 3. Neurodivergence as resistance when the brain won't fit the system. When your brain doesn't fit the system, it's not always the brain that's broken. More often, it's the system that's too rigid, too shallow, too artificial to contain the complexity of a different kind of perception. Neurodivergence reveals the cracks in the architecture, not because it fails to comply, but because it notices too much, feels too deeply, and resists too honestly. In a world that rewards masked precision and punishes raw expression, the neurodivergent self becomes both a glitch in the matrix and a living archive of a more authentic way of being. This isn't romanticization, it's resistance. It's the lived refusal to perform what others call normal, and yet that refusal often comes at a cost: fatigue, isolation, alienation. Especially when compounded by the demands of a hyper-stimulating, aesthetic-driven world that expects all minds to move at the same rhythm, speak the same social code, and show up with the same regulated face. But perhaps this friction is meaningful, because those who don't fit reveal what the system is unwilling to hold, and that is where truth leaks through. As we move forward, we shift our focus from neurodivergent perception to a weapon used against everyone: the manipulation of time and attention. Because if perception is shaped neurologically, it is also distorted temporally. What happens when time itself is fractured, when presence is interrupted, and your nervous system is denied the conditions it needs to exist fully in the now? In the next section, we'll dive into the collapsing of temporal awareness, how deep time has been replaced with dopamine loops, how distraction has become the architecture of culture, and why your sense of self is scattered across 1,000 digital fragments. This is not just about the brain, it's about the clock and how it's being used against you. Section 4. Fractured presence, time, distraction, and the economy of attention. We rarely ask how time feels. We ask what time it is, but in a culture of endless stimulation, time no longer flows, it fragments. The modern mind is rarely present in one moment long enough to feel it. We exist in a kind of perceptual stutter, glancing, clicking, reacting, and refreshing. Presence is no longer a default state. It's a discipline, a luxury, a rebellion. This is not accidental, it is designed. Time has become the hidden currency of control. Your attention, the lifeblood of your awareness, is extracted, divided, and resolved back to you as experience, content, urgency, and curated identity. You are not just being entertained. You are being dislocated. Neurobiology of attention and temporal regulation. Human beings are designed for deep time, slow unfolding, sustained focus, and sensory integration. The brain's default mode network, DMN, activates during introspection, daydreaming, and self-referential thought. This network helps us make meaning, regulate emotion, and develop continuity of self. But in a hyper-connected digital environment, the DMN is constantly interrupted. Instead, the salience network, responsible for detecting novelty and threat, becomes overactivated. Notifications, sounds, flickering screens, and attention-grabbing headlines keep the brain in a near-constant state of orienting to stimuli. This rewires attention into dopaminergic loops. Trigger to click to reward to reset, to scroll to react to forget. Over time, the nervous system loses the ability to enter deep states of presence, not because of weakness or lack of willpower, but because the architecture of distraction has become neurologically internalized. You no longer need to be bombarded. The bombardment is self-perpetuating. Distraction as a form of dispossession. Distraction doesn't just waste time. It dispossesses you of selfhood. It interrupts the nervous system's ability to process subtle emotions, complex thoughts, and spiritual signals. When every moment is punctuated by interruption, when solitude is replaced by scrolling, the capacity for integration collapses. There is no psychic digestion, just consumption. In this state, perception becomes shallow, memory degrades. Time feels like it's speeding up, even though nothing is truly happening. This is a kind of existential anemia, a thinning of experience that leaves you chronically undernourished, no matter how much content you consume. Attention capture and platform colonialism. What's often described as tech addiction is more accurately a behavioral capture system. Platforms are designed not to inform, but to keep you suspended between reactions, between comparisons, between incomplete thoughts. Every feature, from infinite scroll to read receipts, is calibrated to hijack natural cognitive rhythms. Social platforms don't just track your behavior, they shape it. They influence how long you dwell on a post, how fast you read, and when you blink. Or micro-attention cycles become commodified. What used to be solitude is now called inactivity, and what used to be patience is now punished as poor engagement. And this isn't just about the media. It bleeds into how we experience ourselves. If your mind is shaped by fractured time, then your identity becomes fractured too, assembled in fragments, filters, impressions, and incomplete feelings that never land. The psychological cost of collapsed presence. The long-term effects of fractured attention are subtle but devastating. Anxiety rises because the nervous system can't find stillness. Depression deepens as the body loses access to internal reward signals. Creativity flatlines because true originality requires psychic spaciousness. Relationships suffer because intimacy requires presence, and presence requires time. What's lost is not just productivity, it's meaning. When you can't hold your focus, you can't access the deeper layers of your psyche, where memory, desire, fear, and intuition live. And yet we are told that multitasking is modern, that speed is intelligence, that slow is obsolete. This isn't evolution, it's erosion. The algorithmic Sabbath and time as control. Historically, every culture has had some form of sacred time, a Sabbath, a ritual, a space outside of production. Not just to rest, but to reset the nervous system, reorient the psyche, and remember what isn't programmable. In the digital age, these spaces are collapsing. Even rest is branded, even mindfulness becomes content, even silence is edited. This collapse is strategic. When time is no longer yours, your will is no longer yours either. Because willpower requires temporal autonomy, the ability to delay gratification, sit with discomfort, and reflect without distraction. These capacities are destroyed by fractured presence. A distracted mind is not a free mind. It is a programmable one. Time, trauma, and dissociation. Trauma also distorts time. It freezes some moments, stretches others. A traumatized brain often lives in non-linear time, revisiting the past while fearing the future. When this is compounded by digital fragmentation, the individual becomes even more dislocated. They lose their sense of continuity, the thread that ties their experiences into a coherent narrative. Distraction becomes a functional dissociation, a way to avoid what's too painful to process, but also a barrier to healing it. In this way, the economy of attention feeds directly into the economy of unhealed trauma. People become easier to influence when they are out of sync with themselves. Trauma does not just wound the psyche, it dislocates it from time. Unlike ordinary experiences, which are integrated and stored as memory with a clear beginning, middle, and end, traumatic experiences often remain unfinished in the brain. They are not fully processed. Instead, they are encapsulated, frozen fragments of unprocessed time, stored somatically in the nervous system. In neurological terms, trauma impacts the hippocampus, which is responsible for chronological memory, and overactivates the amygdala, which tags experiences with emotional intensity. As a result, the brain stores trauma not as something that happened, but as something that is still happening. This creates temporal confusion. The traumatic past continues to intrude into the present, outside of the person's conscious control. This is not just PTSD. It includes all unresolved emotional overwhelms, neglect, humiliation, abandonment, emotional invalidation, betrayal, and the quieter traumas that don't look like trauma but live like it. The neuroscience of fragmented time. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, in The Body Keeps the Score, describes how trauma survivors often have impaired function in the prefrontal cortex, at the part of the brain responsible for rational thought and self-regulation. This makes it harder to distinguish between past and present when emotionally triggered. The result: a person might react with panic, shutdown, or rage, not to the current moment, but to an echo of one long past. This is why people can feel out of sync with time. Their bodies remain locked in past events while their conscious minds try to carry on. It's not dysfunction, it's a defense. When paired with the external fragmentation of time caused by constant digital stimulation, the individual becomes caught in a double bind. Internally, their sense of time is distorted by unprocessed trauma. Externally, their attention is fractured by a world that refuses to slow down. This is a perfect recipe for dissociation. The mind's escape hatch from overwhelming states it cannot integrate. A lived example: lost time in childhood. I remember sitting in my bedroom as a child, just staring. Not at anything in particular, just into space. Hours would pass, and I wouldn't even notice. I wasn't asleep, but I wasn't awake either. It was like I was floating in this hollow, suspended state, a kind of psychic limbo. Time didn't feel real. I'd blink, and the light outside had changed. I wouldn't remember what I'd been thinking about, just that I hadn't felt here. Not really. My body was present, but something in me had switched off. Or left. At the time, I didn't have words for it. I just assumed I was lazy or weird. But looking back, I understand now that it was dissociation. My nervous system was protecting me the only way it knew how, by detaching me from a reality that felt too emotionally unsafe to fully inhabit. I learned to function like that, to show up, to smile, to engage. But underneath the surface, part of me was always still somewhere else, out of range, drifting just behind the moment. Dissociation is survival and sabotage. Dissociation is not a malfunction. It is a functional strategy designed by the nervous system to preserve safety when full awareness would be too painful. It allows the body to survive the moment, but it fragments the continuity of self. People who live in states of mild or chronic dissociation often describe difficulty remembering conversations or tasks, feeling emotionally flat or disconnected, gaps in time during the day, being present physically but absent internally, living life in fast forward or slow motion, but rarely in real time. When this inner dislocation is compounded by external forces of distraction, healing becomes even harder, because the quiet, slow, reflective states required for emotional integration are drowned out by digital noise, algorithmic urgency, and relentless novelty. In this way, the attention economy and trauma memory become entangled. Distraction becomes a coping mechanism. Scrolling becomes emotional sedation, and presence becomes something you need to recover, rather than something you naturally live in. The path back to temporal integrity, Healing from trauma, then, is not just emotional, it's temporal. It involves re-establishing trust in slow time, rebuilding the capacity to remain present through discomfort, learning to feel your way through moments that were previously too dangerous to inhabit, creating sacred, distraction-free spaces for stillness, memory, and embodiment. Practices like somatic therapy, EMDR, breathwork, and meditative ritual can help re-anchor the body to the present moment, allowing trauma fragments to finally unfreeze and integrate. This process isn't fast, but it is foundational, because without the ability to stay in time, we cannot stay in self. Self-reflection. Where does time feel thin? What part of your day feels like it passes in a blur? What moments feel synthetic, disconnected, or hollow, even if they're full of activity? When was the last time you sat in silence, without reaching for your phone, without trying to be productive, without background noise? What parts of your mind or body only seem to surface when things slow down or stop completely? Ask yourself not just how much time you have, but how deeply you're allowed to experience it. Practical activity, the presence anchor. For 3 days, choose one repetitive daily activity: brushing your teeth, making tea, showering, and use it as a presence ritual. During this activity, commit to 0 distractions. No phone, no multitasking. Focus on sensory details: temperature, texture, sound, and smell. If your mind wanders, gently return to the moment. Afterwards, take 30 seconds to do nothing. Simply sit, let your mind resettle. The goal is not to achieve mindfulness, but to retrain the nervous system to find depth in simple moments, to remember how to feel time. Conclusion to Section 4: Fractured presence, time, distraction, and the economy of attention. When time fractures, selfhood scatters. When presence collapses, control becomes easier. The economy of distraction isn't just an inconvenience, it is a tool of disembodiment. It removes you from your rhythm, your depth, your internal truth. But this erosion of presence is not the only layer of disconnection, because what follows distraction is often authority, the external voice that fills the gap left by inner silence. In the next section, we explore how expert culture, institutional certainty, and ideological obedience become a replacement for inner knowing, and how the death of discernment has turned consent into something hollow. Section 5: Expert gods, authority, compliance, and the death of discernment. The modern world no longer demands faith in religion, it demands faith in expertise. The priesthood has been replaced by credentialed elites, the robe and chalice by the lab coat and clipboard. Certainty has a new face, sterile, data-driven, and empirically packaged, but its function is the same: to provide a sense of security in exchange for obedience. This section explores how authority has become aesthetic, how institutions have gained godlike status, and how the very muscle of discernment, our inner capacity to assess, intuit, and challenge, has been slowly atrophied under the weight of institutional dominance. The rise of the expert class. Once, power spoke through the divine. Now it speaks through statistics. In a world oversaturated with information, complexity has become so overwhelming that many people default to outsourcing their judgment, not to family, community, or direct experience, but to systems of expertise that claim authority over meaning, behavior, morality, and even identity. Medical experts tell us how to feel. Tech experts tell us what's real. Economic experts tell us what we're worth. And political experts tell us who we are. This creates an environment of epistemic dependency, where knowledge becomes gated, decentralized intuition is dismissed, and lived experience is overwritten by institutional consensus. The science of obedience. Psychological studies have long shown how easily people surrender their agency in the presence of perceived authority. In the 1960s, Stanley Milgram's famous obedience experiments demonstrated that ordinary individuals would administer painful electric shocks to strangers if instructed by a figure in a white lab coat. The conclusion? People are willing to harm others and themselves when obedience is framed as virtuous. What has changed is not the psychology, What's changed is the sophistication of the messaging, which is, in my opinion, intentional. The sophistication of language, meaning, nuance and use of jargon, to disarm, to deceive, to disconnect, and elicit dependency. Today, we don't just obey under pressure. We comply under the illusion of rational benevolence. Authority now comes cloaked in professionalism, neutrality, and aesthetic calm, disarming the instinct to resist by presenting itself as apolitical, scientific, or for the greater good. But neutrality is often a mask, and science, when politicized, can become technocratic dogma. The erosion of inner knowing. One of the most damaging side effects of expert culture is the slow erosion of inner knowing. People begin to question their gut feelings. They doubt their intuitions. They hesitate to speak from their bodies, hearts, or experiences unless a recognized institution has pre-validated the truth. This is more than just uncertainty. It's a recalibration of epistemic trust. The compass that once pointed inward begins to orient towards sanctioned external sources. A mother ignores her instincts about her child's behavior because a professional dismissed her concern. A patient silences their discomfort because their scan results show nothing wrong. An artist discredits their vision because it doesn't align with trend-approved aesthetics. The result is a deep fragmentation. An individual with eyes wide open but instincts switched off, a well-informed person who has become existentially misaligned. Consensus as coercion. In a culture of mass compliance, consensus becomes a weapon. The phrase experts agree is not a neutral statement. It is often a psychological cue to bypass questioning. It signals that the thinking has already been done for you. That resistance is not only foolish but immoral. But history tells another story. From eugenics to food pyramids, pharmaceutical disasters to political propaganda, expert consensus has repeatedly enabled harm, not because science is flawed, but because science without soul, dissent, or reflection becomes authoritarianism in a lab coat. To question authority today is often treated as extremism, but many of the world's most profound discoveries, awakenings, and social shifts began not with experts, but with those willing to see what others refuse to look at. Self-reflection. Where have you surrendered your inner authority? What areas of your life have you outsourced completely? Do you trust your research, instincts, and direct experience, or do you wait until someone with credentials confirms what you already sensed? Have you ever silenced yourself in a conversation because you weren't qualified to speak? Where in your life do you obey because it feels easier than standing alone? Ask yourself, what do you know that you've been told not to trust? Practical activity. The inner authority audit. Choose one area of life: health, relationships, finances, creativity, or belief. Write down 5 core decisions or perspectives you hold in that area. For each, ask, where did this belief come from? Did it arise from lived experience, parental messaging, a specific institution, a collective narrative? Now pause, ask, does this belief feel alive in my body or imposed from the outside? Do I act from fear of being wrong or from trust in what I feel is true? The point is not to discredit knowledge, it's to reclaim discernment as a living faculty. Conclusion to section 5. Expert gods, authority, compliance, and the death of discernment. When the voice of your intuition has been drowned out by expert consensus, obedience stops being rational and becomes ritual. Authority today doesn't ask for your reflection. It asks for your trust, and when that trust is given unexamined, even the most personal experiences, pain, joy, discomfort, desire, are reinterpreted through external filters. This is not to suggest that all authority is invalid. Science, data, and expertise have offered incredible tools for understanding the world. But tools are not truths, and when the tools become unquestionable, they become totems. We are witnessing a cultural shift from decentralized wisdom to algorithmic control, from dialogue to doctrine, from embodied knowing to abstract consensus. This shift does more than suppress dissent. It creates spiritual disorientation. You no longer know why you believe what you do. only that it has been verified by someone higher on the pyramid. In this way, knowledge is no longer earned, it is inherited. But there is another form of coherence, one that does not rely on hierarchy, but on resonance. This takes us to a subtler, stranger layer of reality, where memory, thought, and identity may not be confined to linear logic. In the next section, we explore the possibility that the mind is not merely personal or neurological, but entangled, synchronized across time and space. Section 6. Quantum recurrence, entanglement, memory, and the mysticism of mind. We tend to think of memory as personal. Identity is internal. Thought is neurological. But what if consciousness doesn't just arise from the brain? What if it moves through it? What if the mind is less like a machine and more like a field, one that remembers, synchronizes, and reorganizes itself when conditions are right? This is not about science fiction. It's about a growing body of research and ancient intuition that suggests consciousness may operate more like coherence than computation. In this section, we explore a strange idea that your identity, thoughts, and patterns may be entangled, not just within your psyche, but across time, meaning, and matter. What is recurrence? In quantum physics, coherence refers to the alignment of particles into a unified, synchronized state. When coherence collapses, as in the famous double-slit experiment, a particle behaves chaotically, choosing unpredictable paths until it's observed. This is called decoherence. Recurrence, then, is the hypothetical reversal of that collapse, realignment of scattered states into a harmonic whole. It's a concept that doesn't yet exist formally in physics, but metaphorically, it holds immense psychological weight. If trauma, distraction, and social conditioning create decoherence in the psyche, scattering our attention, fragmenting identity, and dissolving continuity, then healing might be seen as a form of recurrence, a reintegration of memory, selfhood, presence, and internal rhythm. This isn't just poetic, it maps to real shifts in the brain. The brain as a coherence machine. Neuroscientifically, coherence can refer to neural synchrony, the rhythmic alignment of brainwave patterns across different regions of the brain. Coherence is often associated with enhanced emotional regulation, focus and clarity, insight and intuition, integration of memory and sensory input. Practices like meditation, breathwork, and psychedelic therapy have been shown to increase coherence between regions like the prefrontal cortex and limbic system, helping the brain resynchronize after prolonged states of fragmentation or stress. Interestingly, similar effects are found in rituals, drumming, chanting, and even intense experiences of awe, suggesting that recurrence may not just be a mental shift, but a spiritual recalibration. Memory beyond the brain? There are forms of memory that defy conventional storage. Some call it body memory. Others refer to genetic memory, ancestral resonance, or morphic fields, concepts proposed by biologists like Rupert Sheldrake, who argue that memory may be non-local, passed through field-like systems rather than physical containers. While mainstream neuroscience remains skeptical of these claims, anecdotal phenomena persist. Sudden emotional releases triggered by sound, smell, or symbols. Dreams that feel like memories from places never visited. Shared emotional experiences between people separated by a great distance. These suggest that memory may not always obey linear, individual logic. Instead, it may be relational, activated not by chronology, but by resonance. Entanglement and symbolic consciousness. Quantum entanglement is a phenomenon where two particles, once linked, affect one another instantaneously, even across vast distances. This has been proposed as a model for understanding certain aspects of human connection, intuition, and collective memory. Some theorists, like Erwin Laszlo and David Bohm, suggest consciousness itself may be an entangled field, where information is not localized in the brain, but distributed across a deeper substrate of reality. What does this mean for the psyche? It implies that identity is holographic. Each moment of consciousness contains the whole. Trauma is not just held in neurons, it's echoed across fields of meaning. And healing may involve tuning yourself back into alignment with those fields through intention, symbol, sound, ritual, and pattern. This is why symbolism and myth persist across cultures, not because they are primitive, but because they are archetypal tuning devices, allowing consciousness to resync with universal rhythms. The role of synchronicity. Carl Jung called this synchronicity, the experience of two or more events being meaningfully connected, though not causally linked. These moments, often dismissed as coincidence, function as signals of recurrence, fragments of life snapping into alignment, reflecting the symbolic architecture of your psyche. To live synchronistically is not to seek signs everywhere. It is to become available to alignment, to accept that your inner world and outer experience may be connected through subtle layers of resonance, not just logic. In that state, memory is not just recall, it's recognition. Healing is not just coping, it's tuning. Self-reflection. Where are you out of tune with yourself? What thoughts feel scattered, disjointed, or repetitive, like fragments of a larger whole you've never fully accessed? What patterns keep looping in your life, no matter how much you understand them logically? Are there moments, symbols, or dreams that feel oddly familiar, as if they belong to more than just your life? Where have you felt in sync with time, self, others, or something deeper, and what pulled you out of that state? Ask yourself, what would it mean to become coherent again, not just mentally, but emotionally, symbolically, spiritually? Conclusion to Section 6. Quantum recurrence, entanglement, memory, and the mysticism of mind. Coherence is not clarity. It's not about being neat, efficient, or perfectly ordered. It's about being in rhythm with your nature, your memory, your unseen intelligence. In a world that fragments your attention, medicalizes your emotion, and digitizes your soul, the possibility of recurrence is revolutionary, because it suggests that you are not broken, you are out of sync. That healing may not always be about fixing symptoms, but tuning yourself back to your original signal. This shift isn't mystical escapism. It's a neurological, symbolic, and existential reality. The brain is not a hard drive, the soul is not software, and memory is not linear. You are entangled in language, culture, experience, ancestry, archetype, and time. To reach aware is to remember without knowing how you know. To recover resonance. To feel your being become whole, not because everything is explained, but because it clicks. But coherence is not always serious. Sometimes it arrives through absurdity, laughter, and emotional inversion. In the next section, we look at a different kind of magic, the kind hidden behind punchlines, sarcasm, memes, and satire. Because even humor can be a spell for healing, for hiding, or for breaking the fourth wall of reality itself. Section 7. Humorous spellcraft, irony, cynicism, and the hidden power of play. In a world drowning in seriousness, humor becomes sacred. It disarms fear, rewires trauma, subverts control, and lets truth slip past the good reason. But it can also distort, numb, or disguise pain beneath punchlines. Humor is not just entertainment, it's alchemy. And in the right context, it becomes spellcraft. This section explores how irony, satire, and absurdity are used not just to cope, but to transform reality itself. It shows how humor masks suffering, reveals insight, builds culture, and even manipulates belief. Because the line between a joke and a revelation is often a matter of timing. Humor as armor. At its most common level, humor acts as a psychological defense. According to Freud, humor is a sublimation, a way for the mind to release unacceptable or painful content in socially acceptable ways. A joke becomes a valve. In this way, humor protects the self from overwhelming truths. People often joke about the very things they feel most anxious, ashamed, or broken about: trauma, death, sex, failure, and addiction. Laughter becomes a buffer zone between feeling and breakdown. But when the joke is repeated too often, when humor becomes the only way in, the individual risks emotional bypassing. Pain becomes performance. Vulnerability is avoided through perpetual cleverness. People stop speaking from the heart and instead speak in memes. This is not healing, it's delayed. The mask of irony. Irony has become the cultural dialect of the disenchanted. In meme culture, political commentary, and daily speech, irony signals intelligence, distance, and cool detachment. But it can also act as a camouflage for despair. The postmodern mind avoids sincerity because sincerity makes it vulnerable. So it cloaks everything in sarcasm, parody, and double meaning. This creates a paradox. The more we laugh, the less we feel. The more clever we sound, the less we say. The ironic self becomes untouchable, always speaking in riddles, never declaring anything real. And while this protects against ridicule or rejection, it also kills intimacy. To feel fully, we must eventually drop the punchline. Humour as ritual, rebellion, and magic. But humour is not always avoidance. It can also be ritualistic, transformative, and sacred. In ancient cultures, the fool or trickster was not merely a comic figure, but a spiritual one. Loki in Norse mythology, Hermes in Greek myth, the coyote in indigenous American traditions. These figures broke rules, blurred binaries, and taught through chaos. They revealed hidden truths by flipping the world upside down. In this way, the joke becomes a symbolic disruption, a way to shake off rigidity, challenge hierarchies, and invite new perspectives. It's not a coincidence that many court jesters were the only people allowed to tell the king the truth, because they said it in a laugh. Even today, comedians often act as cultural shamans, voicing the unspeakable, exposing contradictions, and permitting audiences to laugh at the horror, absurdity, and beauty of being alive. Laughter and neurobiology. Laughter is not just social, it's physiological. It releases endorphins, lowers cortisol, improves immune function, and activates brain regions involved in bonding and empathy. It creates a temporary liminal space, a reset of the nervous system where defense drops and connection becomes possible. This explains why people often cry after laughing too hard. The barrier between grief and joy collapses, and something deeper emerges. Meme culture, spellcraft, and digital alchemy. In the digital age, humor has become mimetic magic, symbols that replicate through networks, bypass rational defenses, and shape perception at scale. Memes operate like viral spells, embedding jokes with ideology, tribal codes, moral positioning, or emotional charge. Some liberate, others indoctrinate. Behind every meme is a framing device, telling you how to see the world, who the joke is on, and what beliefs to adopt by laughing. In this way, humor becomes a covert method of social conditioning, but also a deconditioning tool if used consciously. Self-reflection. What does your humor protect you from? What kind of humor do you instinctively turn to? Sarcasm, parody, dark comedy, absurdity, self-deprecation. What emotions are you avoiding when you joke? Vulnerability, grief, fear, and intimacy. Do you use humor to deflect, to perform, to feel included, or to express something deeper that you couldn't say otherwise? When was the last time you laughed without defense? Not to mock, not to hide, but because you felt truth cracking open. Conclusion to Section 7. Humor as spellcraft, irony, cynicism, and the hidden power of play. Laughter is not the opposite of sorrow, it is its echo. The sound of joy makes when it remembers pain in a fractured world. Humor often becomes the glue, holding people together with shared symbols, in jokes, and references. But it can also become a shield, preventing real connection by keeping everything at a safe distance. There is nothing wrong with joking, but when irony becomes chronic, when every emotion must be filtered through cynicism or snark, something deeper is lost, the ability to feel sincerely. Yet hidden inside humor is enormous power. It can break programming, it can bypass trauma, it can rewire thought patterns, it can slip medicine into sugar, and sometimes it can re-enchant life, precisely because it acknowledges the absurdity of it all. A humor like myth can restore coherence when it points us back to feeling, to present, to absurd beauty, to share an experience that transcends ideology. And that is where we're heading next. The final section of this journey is not critique, but recovery. a return to the inner compass, to symbols, to sensation, to the beauty that pulls you back from numbness and noise and invites you to participate in something meaningful again. Section 8. The re-enchanted self, synchronicity, aesthesis, and the return of symbolic meaning. In a world driven by rational systems and quantified experience, what we've lost isn't just silence or simplicity, it's meaning. We've been taught to see the world as mechanical, stripped of mystery, symbols, or sacredness. Beauty is relegated to marketing. Intuition is dismissed as irrational. Wonder is reserved for children. But beneath that disenchanted surface, something deep awaits, the potential to re-enchant the self. This final section is about coming home to your perception, not through knowledge or logic, but through aesthesis, a felt sense of meaning, harmony, and symbolic resonance that awakens when you stop performing and start noticing. Aesthesis versus aesthetics. Etymologically, aesthesis comes from the Greek aesthesis, meaning sensation, perception, awareness. It's not about how something looks, it's about how it feels to engage with it. Unlike aesthetic, which has come to represent surface beauty, aesthesis is the act of feeling the world, emotionally, bodily, and spiritually. Aesthesis is why some music makes you cry without lyrics, why a certain smell unlocks an entire memory, and why a landscape can make you feel seen. It is perception beneath thought, the sense of symbolic wholeness returning. In this sense, re-enchantment is not magical thinking. It's restored intimacy with the world around you, synchronicity and inner alignment. As explored in Section 6, synchronicity describes meaningful coincidences that defy linear cause and effect. But from the lens of a re-enchanted self, synchronicity becomes more than a curious glitch. It becomes feedback from your coherence. When you begin to heal, when you begin to reach-aware, the outer world reflects the inner shift. You notice patterns, numbers repeat, aims appear, messages arrive in strange places. And though no algorithm explains it, this means something. That knowing is not intellectual. It's symbolic. It's the return of a felt connection to life itself. Symbol, myth and the nervous system. Myth is often dismissed as fantasy, but it is the original operating system of human consciousness. Archetypes, gods, animals, colours and shapes. These were never just stories. They were meaning technologies, ways of mapping internal states onto external patterns, so we could locate ourselves in the chaos. Modern therapy often lacks symbols. Modern education avoids mystery. But without them, the psyche becomes malnourished, starved of the depth it was built to process. Re-enchantment is not about believing in unicorns. It's about learning to speak symbol again, to read your dreams, to interpret the signals of your body, to recognize beauty as more than decoration, as orientation. Self-reflection. What makes you feel spiritually alive? When was the last time something gave you chills, not from fear, but recognition? What art, place, sound, or symbol makes you feel real, seen, or connected? Do you ever experience meaningful coincidences, but talk yourself out of them? Have you learned to trust those moments, or to dismiss them as irrational? What part of you awakens when logic takes a back seat? So we have come to the end of the episode. Let's conclude episode 18, Submerged Signals, How the Unseen Shapes the Self. The return of enchantment is not the denial of reality, it is the rebalancing of it. You were never meant to live as a mind disconnected from a body cut off from beauty, a self divorced from symbol. That fragmentation is the sickness. The restoration is found not in control, but in resonance. This episode began in the deep unconscious, buried signals, missed sensations, hormonal misfires. We journeyed through branding, neurodivergence, time distortion, trauma, technocratic control, quantum memory, humour as sorcery, and finally, here, into the restoration of the symbolic self. This isn't just a presentation, it's a map back to wholeness. And this brings us to the end of the episode. This episode wasn't about finding a singular answer, it was about finding the threads. The ones that run through time, body, memory, symbol, and soul. The threads that re-stitch us back together after fragmentation, perfectly, not linearly, but meaningfully. I've lived much of what we've explored here. There were times I couldn't feel my own emotions, times when my humour masked everything I couldn't yet express, moments I mistook numbness for normal, or handed over my discernment to someone in a white coat because it felt safer than trusting myself. And yet in the quiet, something always called me back. A song, a conversation, a dream I couldn't explain. Moments of synchronicity that reminded me I wasn't broken. I was just out of rhythm. That's what this is, a slow recurrence. A return to my signal, and maybe yours too. So if you've ever felt fragmented, distracted, alienated, performative, or stuck inside a reality that doesn't quite fit, I invite you not to fight harder, but to listen closer. Beneath the noise, your rhythm is still there. Your pattern is still unfolding, and your re-enchantment is already in motion. And finally, I'm James, and thank you for joining me on this episode of the Inversiverse. Until next time, bye-bye.